Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Sorry, that's the wrong way here. And thank you for the invitation to come here to Liverpool. And I think it's very thoughtful of you, Gary, to kind of host this in a Danish-designed building. And I will pass on that grateful act that you did there to Kim, who I know very well, who designed this house. Please turn around so you can see, because it's not me that is important, it's actually some of the slides that I would like to share with you that is important. As you can see, I do have quite a nuanced background and has worked intensively, not necessarily on the cycling agenda, but basically on the agenda of trying to do whatever I can to influence the world, the reality that we are living in. It's very inspirational for me as a human being, and that was when I was an actor. It was the same when I was a member of city council and deputy mayor, and it's definitely also now when I'm the CEO of the Danish Cyclists Federation, which is a very old organization founded in 1905. We have 20 people in our office, and we are quite an important stakeholder in the debate on Danish infrastructure, on Danish transport, and that is, of course, a big help that you kind of have an old organization to speak for you in this sense. I'd like to start with this quote, and please remember it for the next 30 minutes, because this is basically what it is all about. All cities, all countries, probably everywhere in the world, or at least in big part, in all of the Western world, and also in a lot of other different places, we are really facing three enormous challenges. Of course, the climate, CO2 emissions, congestion. Our societies are wasting enormous amount of time in congestion, times where people could go to work or be productive, or time that people could spend together with their loved ones and families, with their kids. They basically spend sitting in car queues around cities. It is a complete waste and a complete unproductive use of time. And then finally, here he says the obesity epidemic, but it is actually the whole epidemic of lifestyle diseases that is really extremely costly for our society. I just discussed it with a counselor who has a nursing background and definitely know all about how important the focus for our societies are on public health. Because if we do not take well care of the public health, it's going to cost our societies fortunes in the long run. There's another way, I think, of saying it here. This is the former Danish Minister for the Environment. She was also an EU Commissioner for the Climate, talking about what kind of communities do we actually want to build. Do we want to have communities where children are depending on their parents to bring them from A to B to C constantly on an everyday basis? I was in Germany recently and I learned a wonderful German expression, being Taxi-Muttis und Taxi-Papas. And I mean, I don't have any children myself, but I can imagine that, I mean, parenthood, driving your kids around all the time, is probably not that fun. I mean, I would much rather basically have that community where kids are able to go around by themselves, explore the world, and kind of increase their ranges. She talks about which I know which I prefer. That is, of course, the last one. The interesting thing, in a Danish context, these two politicians that I quote are right-wing politicians, a liberal and a conservative. And that is one of my key messages to both you as citizens, but definitely also to those of you who are politicians or work within the administration. Try to create a political consensus around this development. Because I don't think it should have any political color, whether you have an interest in either public health or creating communities where kids basically can move around. This is a quote from an essay I wrote, or a thing that I wrote in The Guardian some years ago. And this actually sums it quite good, that whenever you design infrastructure for cyclists and pedestrians, whenever you as a citizen kind of require that or fight for that or demand that, It's always a good question to ask yourself, is this a piece of infrastructure where I would let my child move around? And you will, if you kind of reflect on some of the infrastructure that you have here, if you kind of reflect on that, you will probably realize this is not infrastructure where children should move around in. I don't say that children should go anywhere, but I'm saying that if we want people to use more active mobility, like cycling and walking, it has to be safe and secure. If it does not feel safe and secure, people will not do it. Maybe some, real die-hard, street warriors will kind of go into it. But ordinary, everyday people like most of us, we will not do it, which I think is a very sound thing. And it is quite interesting, actually, to listen to children when they talk about cycling. And the important thing about kids and listening to their voices is basically that they are grown up in a very, very short while. Those are the ones who are going to create a society that we have to kind of benefit from when we get retired. So it is actually quite interesting to listen to that voice. When I ride my bike, I get to new places quickly. Talking about congestion. Because basically going around as a everyday cyclist in a city is of course by far the most efficient, quick way to get around. Bicycles are environmentally friendly. We do know that the transport sector contributes to about 1/3 of the CO2 emission. And there has been a tendency in the debate to believe that, okay, when we get the electric car, everything will be solved. I have to disappoint you. Electric cars take up exactly the same amount of space. They congest just as much, and they create just as much congestion in and around our cities than regular cars does. They also do not contribute to any sort of active mobility. And of course, production-wise, I will not go into that, but production-wise, of course, producing a bicycle is of course much more CO2 friendly than basically producing an individual car. So of course, Tim here is completely right. Bikes are environmentally friendly. Cycling helps you to wake up on sleepy mornings. I think I can see that some of you are cyclists, and I know that you will agree with me. The interesting thing is that we do have scientific research today that tells us that kids who are physically active before they arrive in school, they do perform better. They're better learners. And that is something that we are going to live off in our part of the world, is that we're going to be smarter than the rest, because elsewhere somebody is kind of taking over for us. So we are really depending on developing smart future generations. I would rather go by bike than by car to avoid traffic jams. What a clever young man here. The congestion in and around the 4 big Danish cities, and some of you may have been to Denmark, but the congestion in and around the 4 biggest Danish cities will, up to 2030, increase with 149%. I would take the liberty to presume that the numbers are probably quite similar here, if not higher. And the interesting thing is, because we see an urbanization in all cities all over Europe, and the interesting thing is that we're basically talking a very short time frame, 11 years. Some of us who has a certain age know that 10 years passes with a blink of an eye. So we really have to do something now if we don't want to have societies that come at a complete standstill. This is one of my favorite. I love to ride my bike. It is so hyggeligt. Hyggeligt is a completely untranslatable Danish word. Some of you may have seen The Killing. That is not especially hyggeligt. That's the opposite of hyggeligt. But hyggeligt is actually really having a nice, cozy, warm feeling. And it is true that when we are in person on the street, walking or cycling, we basically create communities where we have eye contacts with each other, where we have room for small conversations, where we can see and experience the first day of spring or the first day of summer. We can share the joy of the football team winning the day before. But that's all the kind of things that you can only experience when you are together with other people. This one, which is basically about how you dress. The shocking news is that you can jump up on your bicycle exactly how you look now, dressed to the occasion, how the weather is, but you don't need any other extra gear when you jump up on your bicycle. I will recommend, if you bike in rain, do wear a rain jacket. I mean, that's a good idea, but that's about it. So it is actually not so difficult that sometimes there's a tendency to kind of make cycling, or everyday cycling, which is my preferable wording of this, everyday cycling, is actually extremely simple. It doesn't require anything special to do it. It's fun to ride the bike. I'm 55 years old. I still have the feeling that every time I jump up on my bicycle, and I do that on a daily basis, every time I jump up on my bike, I feel like I'm Klaus, 5 years old again. And it's a wonderful feeling to have when you're 55, that you're actually able to still have that fun, playful feeling. Because it's like, you know, I have the ability to move these things around. I cycled on a Brompton around Liverpool today, and even though it's a strange environment for me, also riding in the other side of the road, but I think it's really fun going around that way. I really enjoy it. This is quite interesting. Cycling helps you to relax after a long day at school, and it gives you a sense of freedom. I know the numbers are similar in UK than it is in Denmark. We have more and more and more young people, and we actually have more and more people who have difficulties in life, mentally, who find lives very stressful, anxiety, depression. And we also know that going out, being physical active, is probably one of the best things you can actually do to prevent that. But also going out in green areas. And again, going on your bicycle actually quite quickly transport you to green areas. And my own favorite, I love to ride my bike. I have no idea why. Okay, so cycling in Copenhagen is of course at a completely different level than you see here. And that of course also makes it interesting politically, because when you see that almost 50% of all trips to workplaces and study places within the municipality are taken by bike every single day throughout the year, you are of course politically talking into a very big constituency when we're talking about cycling. But also quite interestingly, 68% of all trips to, from and in Copenhagen are either by foot, public transport, or on bicycle. The ambition for 2025 is 75%, and I'm pretty sure that we're going to reach that level. And the Copenhagen as well, they don't bike because they're especially eco-friendly. Well, they are, but that's not the reason. The reason is that it's easy and it's a fast way to get around the city. And I basically like the idea of living in a city where transportation and mobility is easy. I also like to live and work in a city where the transport system actually is designed so getting around is fast. I like the idea of being an efficient city. Not to elaborate too much about statistics, but this is basically, you can see the 49 number up there, the 49%, which is the share that cycle to work in education today in 2018. Well, 10 years ago, it was 37%. So there has been a 12% rise over a 10-year period. But just to say, with political stamina, with political focus, of course with the right development, with the right level of investment, but you can actually change how mobility takes place in a city. And quite interestingly enough, you also see you see the satisfaction level has risen, the number of seriously injured cyclists has fallen quite a lot. So really on all factors, the development is going in the right direction. And you also see that the amount of cycle kilometers has actually also increased, and the number of cycle tracks are going on and going on and going on and increasing and increasing and increasing. And that is basically, I mean, that is my message number 2, is political consistency, I think is the right word, yes. That you basically stick to this agenda. When you decide that this is a development that you want, please stick on to it, also to the next election period and the next and the next, because this is a It does take time, but it is definitely worth investing it, and it's also definitely worth basically reporting, calculating, measuring, because it is numbers like this that will probably convince even the most bike skeptic politician that it is actually a quite good investment that we do there. So this is an ordinary morning in Copenhagen. This is a winter morning, not super comfortable, but maybe part of the Viking gene that is left in us, that some of us are crazy enough to do this. You will come across a lot of these kids in Copenhagen, kids riding together with their parents. We do also have scientific research that kids that kind of experience the city this way as children have a stronger cognitive sense. And you can almost imagine what a wonderful freedom as a child you have here, or sitting in a cargo bike together with your parents, if the alternative is, being bondaged on the backside of your parents' car, not really being able to see what goes on around you. So it's a wonderful freedom, and see what a wonderful contact that the mother has with her kids here. I mean, I really can't think of a better way basically to be with your kids. Now I managed basically to break this one. No. I basically move over here, no problem. We just move this one. Yeah. In Denmark, we believe that a child around 18 months basically should be able to start learning to be, we call it cycle safe, or refer to it as cycle safe, before they become traffic safe. So basically start at that early age, learning about balancing, learning about going with one arm, learning about, how do you react when a lot of things happens around you, because that is how traffic is, that you basically need to learn to stay focused. And we work with the whole concept of, we call it cycling games, where you through fun, joy, playfulness, basically gets extremely familiar with cycling. So instead of starting with the very tough traffic rules, and you're not allowed to do this and don't do that and really pay attention to that, that's not the way to learn children to do things. The way to learn it is basically through games, through fun. So cycling basically stays a wonderful, great thing to do. And we believe that when kids are around the age of 5-6 years old, they basically should be able to cycle with themselves, of course in the company of their parents. And around 11-12 years old, the child or the young person should be able to move around in the city by themselves. Of course, the infrastructure has to be designed so that is possible. So there's a lot of these cycling families. And what is the idea behind a cycling family? Well, trust me, these two young boys here, I am 110% sure that when they have had a childhood like this, cycling will, when they grow up, that will always be a complete equal choice they can take basically before every trip they embark on. And of course, for some trips, I will also choose the car. For a lot of trips, I will take the train. But for a lot of the shorter trips, I will definitely take the bicycle in the city. And we know, and the numbers are probably about the same here, but 30% of all car rides in Denmark, 30% are 5 kilometers, that's 3.5 miles or less. And trust me, jumping up on your bike for 3.5 miles, that is nothing. No matter who you are, what shape you're in, that is possible for everyone. Of course, if the right infrastructure is there. And this is another cycling family in Copenhagen, the Royal Highnesses, the Crown Prince couple. You quite often come across them taking their kids to kindergarten in the morning. And this is, of course, basically saying that it's cycling is for everybody. Young people, old people, big people, small people, tall people, rich people, poor people, royal people, everybody can be up there. But it is extremely important that we in our society also identify champions or role models whom we can actually see. That can be sports stars, actors like the two of us. It can also be business leaders, politicians, but it's basically important that we do have people in our community that we look up to, and we see them doing that, and that is a good thing and very important thing for us to do. They, of course, use their cargo bike to bring their kids around in the royal family. 30% of Copenhagen families with 2 kids or more use the cargo bike as a primary mean of transportation. But the cargo bike can be used for a lot of different things, to do big shopping, like the Christmas tree here, or this locksmith that I met outside my office. He told me that he pays around 150 quid per year to do repairs on his rolling van there, cargo bike. And when he had a van, he actually paid 1,500 quid per year in repairs. So it's, it's good money. He goes quicker around to his client. That's a good idea. This lady actually also does good business. It's an undertaker in Copenhagen. Yes, but think about 2 things when you see this. First of all, and I have attended 2 funerals that she did. It's one of our members in the Cyclist Federation, and I have been allowed by the family to use the picture. But look at what a kind, calm atmosphere around the goodbye in life that it actually creates. And that's one thing. But the other thing is that it's essential and extremely important that we have an innovative approach to how can we change things in our cities. How can we change the way we transport things around? How can we develop businesses that can actually use and integrate that? Have patience, have patience, have patience. It does take time. Liverpool will not become Copenhagen in 5 years' time. It does take a little longer. And here you can basically see the development of bicycle tracks over a 100-year period in Copenhagen. So it is basically about getting started because you're also defining the future of your city. These are the principles in Denmark. Cycle tracks along all major roads, making sure that you have a network looking at where the accidents are happening. And of course, also pay attention to what is happening in the climate debate. You're probably aware of this young lady, Swedish lady here. And as it says here on the graffiti, listen to Greta Thunberg, that's actually not the point with the slide. The point of the slide is basically to look at the train. These are the regional trains in the greater Copenhagen area. 6 years ago, it was introduced that you could take your bike for free. And that has been probably the biggest transport policy success in Denmark. They now carry, and they cover a radius of around 45 kilometers around in the greater Copenhagen area, in the region. And they carry 11 million bicycles per year now, and they have risen the number of passengers with 8%. What does this prove? I'm not saying that you should do this, but this proves one thing. Cycling and public transport are should be extremely closely connected. And the interesting thing in making sure that, for example, there's good bicycle parking at the bus stops or the tram stops or the train stops, is that you actually expand the feeding radius into the public transport if you make sure that connection is good. And also, notice the big sign on the side of the train. It's extremely visible that this is possible. It's not kind of a small sign at the door, but it's actually extremely visible, and not only visible for the people on the platform, but actually also visible for the people who sit in queues in the highway, who see the train passing, saying, that is actually a possibility that I can do yet. So it is, of course, also very important to make the alternatives visible. We have developed, and I know that you have plans about the same here in the region to basically work with, we call them supercycle highways, but basically connecting the suburbs with where the workplaces are, where the universities are, and kind of creating these corridors. That is interesting also with the development of new technology with bicycles, with the electric bicycle. We suddenly expand the radius that is accessible on a bicycle on an everyday basis. This is the famous bicycle serpent in the city of Copenhagen, and another wonderful bridge in Copenhagen, the Circle Bridge designed by Danish-Icelandic artist, Olafur Eliasson. But it shows, there's one point with these two pictures here, and that is using very good designers, using aesthetics also in some of these solutions. Because what happens when, first of all, you open up how you basically as a citizen see the city, but you also feel extremely humble and very, very grateful when you see that the city has constructed such beautiful infrastructure for you. You really feel seen and recognized. And again, it's infrastructure that is only accessible by bike or by foot. So if you kind of want to enjoy that bridge when you drive your car, get out. There's extremely good investments. The return of investments are extremely high when it comes to cycling. This is numbers from the Danish Ministry for Transport, that we basically, for every single kilometer we exchange the car with the bike, we save the Danish society for almost £1 in improved prolonged life and improved health. But just to say, it is extremely good business. You can see here the number of absentee because of sickness days in the capital region of Denmark, 1.3 million people, basically went down with over 1 million days because of what is cycled today. So if any of you work with management or are directors, you know that bringing your staff's absentee days down is one of the best investments that you can ever make. So just to round off, it's important how we think about the car's access to the city. This is a wonderful quote from a Spanish mayor, I don't know, but it says, just because you buy a car, it does not mean that you at the same time is being given a chunk of the city. Think about how much space we give away to park cars on the street. Just reflect, I mean, is that totally fair? I'm not really sure. Or this Swedish former Minister for Environment, it's time to take the car down from the pedestal and treat it as a mean of transport, just like any other mean of transport. It is basically as simple as that. This is the new Danish Prime Minister there in the middle. This is just a few days before our election. And of course, having the political leadership very visible, this is the Danish Minister for Transport, who has a hashtag where he kind of promotes himself as the cycling minister. But it's extremely important to kind of get the political leadership on board in this agenda. This is the present Danish commissioner to the EU, Mrs. Vestager. And isn't it wonderful to have politicians who say that basically they would rather invest in bicycle tracks than highways. It is so important that we help our leaders to be outspoken on this agenda. So just to round off with my suggestions for you, make sure that the next generation is not a generation of car drivers, but that's a generation of mobilists that understand that we also, through new technology, that the trip in the future will be a combination of different modes of transport. Understand that this takes public investment. It does not come for free. But trust me, the highways cost money also. The train system costs money. Airports cost money. It does cost money to make the right infrastructure. And paint, don't do it. You have to build proper, segregated, curbed infrastructure. Have patience. Dare to be aesthetic. And also develop very, very good, recognizable design plans. Integrate cycling and walking in the development of new technologies. This is very important. You are very lucky that you haven't had the electric scooters all over. We are being sworn over by them in Copenhagen. And it is really important that we make sure that cycling and walking is a part of that discussion. Engage the civil society and make sure that you include a wide political spectrum, and that basically leads to that you create policies and visions that are politically sustainable and can survive change of leadership, and also report to the public on what you are doing. So please be courageous if you're a politician, be visionary if you're a planner or a designer, and if you're a citizen, please promise me to engage, because that is very, very important. Finally, I just pay your attention to the Cycling Embassy of Denmark, and I'm actually very happy that Mr. Boardman is here tonight, because he before summer, he got the International Leadership Award from the Danish Cycling Embassy, which is a very elitist group of #1 cycling advocates that we like to honor from Danish side. But the Cycling Embassy just launched a very good platform, cyclingsolutions.info, that has a lot of best practice information from Danish municipalities, designers, policymakers, and all that stuff. So I will definitely encourage you to check out that website. And please also follow the embassy online. That's very good information. Thank you very much for your attention. And as we say in Denmark, pedal power, yes please.